Eye-opener, required chaos. If you are a leader in the modern world, whether a CEO of a large company or an entire country, you need to have a reason to lead. In other words, if your corporation is running autonomously or your country is at peace and prosperous, why would either need your guidance? Neither of these scenarios is possible in reality, but as with everything in life, there are degrees, levels to the amount of leadership required. Whether you run a company like Tesla or a country like the United States of America, the necessity for your leadership must be apparent. In the case of a corporation, you must exhibit an ability to increase profits for the company. At least in capitalism, though there may be several reasons, the primary one is that under capitalism, if you're not growing, you're dying. Meaning if your company isn't getting big enough to swallow up your competition is getting big enough to swallow you up. If you doubt this, just look at almost every, if not all industries today, and try to find one where a monopoly or near monopoly doesn't exist. Even amongst the most important of industries, competition has waned to the point where the consumer has little to no choice. How many cable companies can you pick as your service provider today? Even an industry so important to have been enshrined in our Constitution, news, is owned by a very limited number of corporations. Though it may appear to have several sources, most of the mainstream news we get is controlled by 5 or 6 corporations. Bill Clinton made this a certainty when he signed the Telecommunications Act of 1996. At the time, there were 50 to 60 telecommunications corporations. This number of telecommunications corporations kept news sources much more honest than only having 5 or 6 ever could. Of course, we have independent news sources on the internet today, but they not only lack the resources needed to provide full coverage, but they don't control the platforms upon which they provide their news. Websites like Google, Facebook, and more have been exposed for their censorship which is allowed because these are private companies and therefore not subject to our First Amendment. Now, whether you agree that YouTube should be allowed to censor whatever it wants or not, you cannot deny that a platform as widespread as YouTube can shape whatever news narrative it wants to shape. And given the threat that government regulation poses to the platform, it might succumb to unscrupulous actors seeking re-election or the favor of some wealthy campaign donors. Speaking of campaigns and donors, does anyone still believe Trump will keep his campaign promises now that he's going along with his biggest, at least most viable donor, Elon Musk's desire to import low-wage immigrants to take American jobs? Given that the positions that Elon wants to fill aren't even the jobs that no American wants to do, what argument could Musk or Trump have to justify backtracking on Donald's primary promise on immigration? In the past, Donald Trump has even expressed how detrimental programs like HB-1 visas is to workers. So why would he let down those who put him in office? For that matter, why would any of our leaders for the past few decades continually and consistently let the masses down? Why would American leadership feel confident enough to never appease the majority for 20, 30, 40 years or more? Why would the Democratic Party put forth Joe Biden, who was in an apparently diminished mental state, before he was elected leader of the free world? Now that pointing out Biden's apparently declining mental acuity will no longer get one canceled, I can freely ask why it was that I could see and point out Biden's failing mental state before he was elected, and why so few, if any, who voted for him could not. I mean, there are so many videos that show he was never competent to be president. Even when he was younger, he was a known plagiarist and liar. And while Trump is known to lie as well, Trump hasn't made a career of lying to the entire country while professing to want to lead the country. Trump's lies as America's leader only span 4 years, whereas Biden's span 4 decades. In that time, Biden has supposedly served the people, while Trump served himself and other private investors. Biden misled the whole country for 4 decades, while Trump allegedly misled private investors. Until Trump became president, he only impacted people who knew they were investing in something that could cost them financially. Whether that impact be positive or negative, pre-presidency, Trump's career could only have hurt 1, 2, or 3 million people, maybe more. Joe Biden, on the other hand, impacted the lives of hundreds of millions. Biden's legacy impacted 2 million people on just one of his bills. His crime bill of 1994 doubled the number of incarcerated Americans. including crimes for which Joe just pardoned his son Hunter. Biden has been a leader in America and overseen its decline for 40 years, but the news would have you believe that Trump is the bigger threat. The news had everyone believing Biden wasn't in mental decline. And when Biden's false narrative fell apart, the news had many believing that a cackling fool like Kamala Harris could be respected by other world leaders. One can't even say that this is a case of hindsight being 2020. The failings of both Biden and Harris were on full display. Yet those 5 of 6 corporate news sources convinced a large portion of the public that everything was honky-dory. Donald Trump being elected president in 2016 and re-elected president in 2024 is what you get when you consistently vote for the lesser of two evils. It's what you get when you don't do the most meager of searches into those hoping to lead you or the donors backing them. It's what you get when you allow leaders like Nancy Pelosi do insider trading when it's illegal for almost all other Americans, including Martha Stewart, who served time for such activity. It's the result of voting blue no matter who. For those who haven't heard, you just end up blue. Well, enough with the complaints. Let's talk about how we got here. The short and simple answer is through chaos. If you as a leader offer nothing, or more accurately choose to offer nothing but empty campaign promises, you'd better have a means to control the restless natives. You could provide the masses with universal health care as is offered in every other developed nation on earth, or you can call it socialism. After all, it makes much more sense to tie an individual and their family's health to a job at which said individual only spends 8 hours. I know, and nobody's working a 40-hour week these days, but let's pretend, the way that salaried workers pretend that they won't work any less than 50 a week. So how would you keep people in line while offering them nothing in return for their faith in your leadership? Chaos. The more chaotic their lives, the less they gather their thoughts to determine the true cause of their plight. Taking that chaos one step further, why not have them at each other's throats instead of at yours? Call half of them deplorable and break down all communications between them. And while we're at it, why not break down communications across the globe? Why not threaten other nuclear powers and call anyone seeking diplomacy a Putin, Assad, cheap puppet? Keep the entire planet on red alert, and no one will blame you for whatever terrible things you do, until it's too late, that is. Blame everything on anything other than wealth inequality, so the richest man, who was Jeff Bezos a few years ago at $150 billion, can be worth 3 times as much at $450 billion as is Elon Musk today. Why not let arguments about how taxing 100% of a wealthy person's income won't fix our national debt persist? Even though this ignores the decades of taxes that the ultra-wealthy have avoided paying. Regardless of whether this would fix our national debt, shouldn't the wealthy still pay their fair share in taxes? This feels like a lack of loyalty on their part. But we've been trained to idolize the rich, not blame them for the increasing poverty their excessive wealth is causing. We've been taught that Americans are lazy even when more are working 2 or more jobs. Even when crap-paying jobs call an employee in on their day off, the workers in America are demonized and paid wages that don't cover their living expenses. How can a business model that pays wages so low as to require government subsidies like welfare and SNAP be considered viable or sustainable? To find out other ways you're being screwed by your current leaders, check out the posts on this blog daily. Learn about the biggest and worst issues that America and its people face today. You can also check in to hear about those issues that America and its people will face in the near and distant future. If, however, you would like to discover possible solutions to either mitigate the worst impacts of these issues or solutions to avoid them altogether, keep listening. The problems we face are not as complicated as so many leaders and news reports claim. They are man-made and are only claimed as complicated so those who are responsible can maintain control. For example, there is a persistent argument that moving government is like turning a cruise ship around. It is supposedly a long process that can only be achieved incrementally. While this may be true for laws and policies that benefit the majority of Americans, it does not seem to be so for that smallest of American minorities. When one examines the policies and laws that benefit that minority known as the elite or the rich, the speed at which those laws are passed is exponentially faster. While most of us sit on the deck chairs waiting for the Titanic to avoid the myriad of icebergs of which we seem to continually run afoul, the elite ride comfortably in speedboats. If, according to our Constitution, all men are created equal, why do the rich live quite different lives than the rest of us? Where is our speedboat? In 2018, Chris Osman wrote a book highlighting the problems humanity would face if more power, wealth, and control were funneled to a small group of individuals, groups, or organizations. In that book, Mr. Osman provided solutions, from himself and others, to the inevitable problems we would all face. In it, he also provided a means for the public to analyze, compare, and contrast the words and deeds of those we've chosen to follow against our real-world experiences. To this end, Mr. Osman provides the means for readers to disseminate information as provided by their news sources of choice, their elected officials, and any other authority they choose to follow. The book, titled Solutions, Enough Complaining, Let's Fix America, offers a means to hold leaders up, not just to a higher standard than is currently accepted, but to one that will improve lives. When chaos is the outcome, it's time for a new approach. Click the link below and get your copy of Solutions today.